Today, we're taking a really fascinating and honestly a deeply concerning journey,
We are. We're going to the coast of South America, focusing on the nation of Guyana.
which has become the absolute epicenter of this massive, high-stakes legal battle.
This is a crucial deep dive for you, the learner, because it really puts the sheer weight of global corporate power up against the fundamental right to existence.
It really does. You have this small global south nation, rich in untouched rainforests, and then suddenly it's sitting on an estimated 11 billion barrels of offshore oil.
Discovered by ExxonMobil, no less.
Exactly. And the problem is simple, but I mean, it's profound. Extracting that oil turns what is a climate haven
Right.
into what experts are bluntly calling a global carbon bomb.
And the stakes are not abstract here at all. They're truly existential for the Guyanese population.
Mhm.
This is a nation where, 90% of the citizens live along this incredibly vulnerable coastline.
Right. They are literally facing a ticking clock.
I mean, the sources have climate experts warning that large parts of the capital city, Georgetown, and these coastal areas could be underwater within the decade.
It's the ultimate paradox, isn't it? This massive oil wealth promises economic transformation, a quick path out of poverty.
Right.
But that very transformation is based on the activities that will guarantee a climate catastrophe for the very same population.
It's a tragic choice. A choice forced upon a nation that historically has contributed almost nothing to global warming.
And here's the element that makes this story so captivating for us to unpack. The legal battle to defuse this carbon bomb is being led by Melinda Janki.
Who is described as petite, witty, and absolutely fierce. And she's not just fighting Exxon.
No, she's fighting the government of her own country that approved the drilling.
But here's the twist. I mean, this is the part that just makes it a Hollywood movie. Melinda Janki spent 4 years working as an in-house lawyer for BP.
That is the ultimate strategic advantage. It's incredible. She understands the oil industry's internal legal structures, their risk assessments, their blind spots.
She knows everything.
She knows how they think, all from the inside. And her mission now is to use that deep, applied expertise, not just against a corporation, but against the very laws she herself helped write 3 decades ago to protect her homeland.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to dive deep into the source material to understand the visionary legal tools Janki helped to create, tools specifically designed to protect Guyana's environment and climate.
We'll also get into the alarming severity of that climate threat and why the outcome of this single case holds such profound economic and legal implications for the entire global fossil fuel industry.
And for you, as a future decision maker, this is essential stuff, so let's get into it.
Let's do it.
We have to begin with the physical reality of Georgetown, because the city itself is it's proof of the high stakes.
When you read the sources, you get this beautiful but profoundly vulnerable image. We're talking about lush tropical flowers, waterways.
A vibrant, yet completely exposed location.
Right. Georgetown actually sits below sea level. It's shielded by these old seawalls, and it's interlaced with rivers and canals.
So historically, all that water was an asset.
Right, exactly. It carried fresh water from the Amazon basin. It provided transportation. But now, as sea levels rise and rainfall becomes more extreme, that whole infrastructure, it just turns into a liability.
Making the entire coastal plain extremely susceptible to, well, catastrophic flooding.
The sources describe a city in flux. It's almost caught between 2 centuries.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it's an impoverished city, struggling with high unemployment and poverty, yet it's rapidly industrializing because of the promise of oil.
Okay.
So you see these newly traffic-clogged streets, but they're struggling to accommodate old horse-drawn carts carrying goods.
I saw that image. There's one of cows grazing peacefully right next to these shiny new American fast food chains like Popeyes and KFC.
Right, it's a symbol of this sudden, completely uneven growth.
And this rapid development is running on borrowed time. This is the core fact that gives Janki's legal fight so much urgency. The climate deadline.
Climate experts estimate that by 2030, which is shockingly only a few years away,
It's right around the corner.
massive sections of Georgetown and the entire coastal region will just be rendered uninhabitable.
And that's due to sea level rise and these increasingly intense weather events, all driven by unchecked global warming.
And that impact isn't limited to the coast where the majority live. The people in the interior, they face a different but equally devastating threat.
Worsening droughts, right.
Worsening droughts, threatening farming communities, but also, paradoxically, more catastrophic, unexpected floods that destroy homes and traditional crops.
This vulnerability, it just stands in such stark contrast to the size of the oil discovery. ExxonMobil struck oil off the coast in 2015,
And the scale of the find has only grown. It's currently estimated at 11 billion barrels.
which immediately put Guyana into this new, very alarming category.
And that category is the carbon bomb.
We should clarify this concept because it's a specific technical term, not just a dramatic headline.
Absolutely. So a carbon bomb is a massive fossil fuel project, oil, gas, or coal, that has the potential, if it's fully exploited, to release over a gigaton of carbon dioxide emissions.
1 billion tons.
A billion tons. And the total estimated reserves in this Exxon-led project, they meet that criterion. These are projects that fundamentally lock the global system into a trajectory that's just incompatible with our climate goals.
And Exxon's operational goal demonstrates the scale of this lock-in. By 2030, they plan to produce over 1 million barrels of oil every single day.
That transformation is nearly unprecedented. Right now, Guyana is a net carbon sink.
Meaning what, exactly?
It has extremely low national emissions, and its massive, dense rainforests actually absorb more carbon than the nation emits.
Okay.
If Exxon reaches that production target, Guyana would transform, seemingly overnight, into one of the world's top 20 oil producers and one of the world's major climate liabilities.
By the end of the decade.
Yeah. This transition from sink to bomb, that is the central tension of this whole case.
So let's talk about the structure you need to fight this kind of Goliath. The source material emphasizes that calling this a David versus Goliath endeavor, it feels like an understatement.
The difference in legal firepower is almost absurd. I mean, think about the scale of global oil litigation. When Exxon faced U.S. state attorneys general a few years back, they submitted over 2 million pages of records.
2 million pages.
In just one court. That requires an army of paralegals and hundreds of lawyers to manage.
And on the plaintiff side in Georgetown, what does that look like?
Melinda Janki and her co-counsel, Ronald Birchsmith, initially had exactly one legal assistant.
Wow.
That's the entire legal infrastructure fighting a multi-billion-dollar global corporation. It really speaks to the personal commitment required.
So she doesn't have a massive litigation support system.
Not at all. She's known to stand in the court lines herself and personally cart these enormous files, we're talking thousands of pages, just to file pleadings. She reads and analyzes all this material without the aid of a large, high-powered team. That tenacity becomes the foundation of their entire strategy.
It sounds incredibly arduous. The sources describe the legal team as this sort of odd couple, but one perfectly suited for this relentless fight.
They are definitely complementary. Ronald Birchsmith is described as meticulous, maybe a bit reserved. The kind of lawyer who operates with total rigor.
There is a detail about a framed Phantom of the Opera playbill in his office.
Right, which reflects that meticulous nature.
And Janki provides the fire. She is petite, sharp-witted, and she quickly moves to what the source calls rigorous denouncements of injustice.
And her office has that powerful visual. A life-size painting of a fierce yellow jaguar poised to step out of a blackened forest.
That is the energy you need when you're trying to stop a project that could doom your entire nation.
The contrast is important. The sheer imbalance of resources means Janki and Birchsmith can't fight on Exxon's turf. The procedural games, the document dumps.
She had to fight on pure principle.
Exactly. Using the constitutional foundation Janki herself laid decades ago. This forces the fight onto Guyana's strongest, most visionary ground, the rule of law.
This brings us to the extraordinary personal history of Melinda Janki. To understand the power she's wielding in this courtroom, we have to look back at the incredible path she took.
Especially her time inside big oil.
Right. Her early life was rooted in Georgetown. She left in the 1970s at age 12 because of political instability.
And she eventually studied law in London, focusing on human rights and environmental law at Oxford and University College London. This gave her that global perspective.
She started her career in these high-powered corporate settings, first at a premier London corporate law firm, which she jokingly called Lovely, White, and Clean.
And then, in 1989, she made the critical career move. She went in-house to BP's world headquarters.
She spent 4 years there, not just as a lawyer, but as someone absorbing the operational realities of one of the world's largest oil companies.
She saw firsthand how the contracts were written, how liability was structured, and how the industry insulated itself from environmental risk.
And the reason she left is so fundamental to her current fight. It wasn't about the work itself, but this growing existential crisis.
She was working on the 30th floor of a London skyscraper and said she felt entirely cut off from nature.
Her realization was that immense comfort, That distance from the consequences of her work was fundamentally corrosive.
She has that famous quote, "Comfort is a form of suicide," meaning that kind of intellectual or moral stagnation that comes from material ease.
So she rejected it. She returned to Georgetown in 1994, drawn by this deep emotional tug to her homeland.
Right, as Guyana was trying to find its feet politically, and this is where she begins engineering the legal fortress.
She describes herself as a nobody with no political connections.
But she learned in 1995 that the nation was holding a conference to draft its first Environmental Protection Act.
And she had to get in that room, so she finagled a press pass through a connection.
And attended the conference. She read the initial draft of the act and was, frankly, horrified. She realized it was far too weak to protect Guyana's unique resources from future exploitation.
So what did she do?
During a coffee break, she immediately lobbied a special advisor to the president, making quite a nuisance of myself, as she put it.
And it worked.
It worked. Her expertise and conviction impressed him, and she was hired to draft the final law. She scoured the globe for the most robust environmental legislation and integrated the strongest provisions into Guyana's new framework.
And the result was the Environmental Protection Act, or EPA, of 1996, a truly revolutionary document. Let's pause on some of the key innovations she included.
First, she embedded the polluter pays principle, ensuring companies would be held liable for cleanup costs rather than socializing the environmental damage.
And she also included the precautionary principle.
Yes, which mandates that the government must prevent harm even when there isn't total scientific certainty about the risk. This shifts the burden of proof.
How does that differ from, say, standard legal due diligence in the United States?
Well, in many northern nations, a regulator often needs overwhelming evidence of definite harm before they can stop a project.
Right.
The precautionary principle flips that. If there is a plausible risk of serious or irreversible harm like, massive climate change impacts, the burden falls on the developer to prove that their project is safe.
A much higher legal hurdle.
Much higher. But the truly groundbreaking part, considering it was 1995, was her definition of the environment.
It was radical foresight.
Absolutely. Janki explicitly defined the environment to include the atmosphere and the climate. She was embedding the legal basis for today's climate suit decades before this became a mainstream legal issue.
She was future-proofing the legislation against the exact scenario Guyana now faces.
Exactly. She knew, even then, that the oil majors were downplaying or actively misleading the public about greenhouse gas pollution.
By including the atmosphere and climate in the definition, she ensured that subsequent regulations like environmental impact assessments, or EIAs, had to consider climate impacts.
And that EIA requirement wasn't toothless. Far from it. The EPA required detailed EIAs for any large project. And crucially, the Environmental Protection Agency was granted the power to reject projects outright if the assessments were lacking.
Real veto power.
Real veto power.
Yeah.
But then she included this incredibly visionary stuff that often gets overlooked, the concept of natural capital.
I want to spend a moment here because this isn't standard law.
No, natural capital is the ultimate challenge to conventional economic thought. The EPA requires an annual publicly available accounting of the nation's entire ecosystem, the wildlife, the vegetation, the forests.
It quantifies the inherent value of the natural world.
Right.
So let's contrast this directly with the standard economic measure like gross domestic product, GDP.
Perfect example.
Under GDP, if I clear-cut 10,000 acres of rainforest, the GDP immediately registers a positive spike. Machinery, labor, timber exports, it all looks like a benefit.
Precisely. GDP treats resources as infinite and environmental costs as, externalities. Natural capital flips that equation entirely.
So the destruction of that same 10,000 acres of rainforest registers as a profound cost.
It registers as a profound cost. Lost value in carbon sequestration, lost value to biodiversity, lost value to indigenous communities who depend on it. Protection of natural capital registers as a quantifiable economic benefit.
I can see why this is so critical to the current fight. It provides the financial and legal language to argue against oil profits.
Because it measures the true long-term cost of development. It connects conservation directly to national wealth and human well-being.
After a major environmental catastrophe, a cyanide spill in 1995, public support solidified, and the EPA was signed into law in 1996. But Janki wasn't done.
No, she made sure to embed these protections even deeper. She lobbied heavily during the 1998 constitutional review process.
And this is the core legal tool in the current case. What specific rights did she secure?
Two critical provisions. First, Every Guyanese citizen was given the right to an environment that is not harmful to his or her health or well-being,
A legally enforceable right to survival and health.
making it immediately justiciable. And second, the scope of that protection extends beyond the current generation.
Future generations.
Right. The state was made responsible for protecting the environment for the benefit of present and future generations. This is essential
Why?
because it means the government cannot legally trade the current generation's short-term economic gain for the future generation's existential demise.
So if you stack all that together, the climate defined as part of the environment, natural capital, and a constitutional right to a healthy environment for future generations, you realize this small global South nation has environmental protections far stronger than those in most Western countries.
That's the absolute takeaway for the learner. As Carol Muffett of the Center for International Environmental Law noted, Janki built a fortress. He said, virtually every aspect of this operation is in violation of Guyana's constitution, and from that arise serious consequences.
The battle now is over whether the courts will enforce the law as it was written.
Exactly.
Okay, so the discovery of 11 billion barrels of oil was supposed to launch Guyana into prosperity.
That was the promise.
Yet, Melinda Janki is fighting it precisely because she argues it will instead lead to ruin. Let's look closely at the economic reality she is fighting against, starting with that contract signed in 2015.
The contract was signed quickly by the then Granger government. The 23-year operating permits were initially kept hidden from the public.
And when the details finally emerged,
Independent industry analysis was damning. Guyana is receiving a significantly below-average return for its oil. The critique that the deal was signed for peanuts is widespread and, frankly, justified.
and the most problematic section, the one that guarantees Guyana is left holding the bag, is the cost recovery structure.
This is the mechanism that ensures that lopsided profit split. Exxon is allowed to recover all of its development and operating expenses first, before the profits are split.
So drilling costs, salaries, infrastructure, even the interest on their loans.
All of it. So if the profits of a given quarter are, say, $100 million, but Exxon claims $90 million in recoverable costs, only the remaining $10 million is subject to that 14.5% split for Guyana.
And the sources point out that these costs are often opaque and really difficult for the Guyanese government to audit effectively.
Which leads to overclaiming of expenses and, therefore, a very slow pace of cost recoupment.
I have to pause on the staggering figure I saw in the source material. By 2027, an analysis estimates that Guyana will carry a liability of more than $34 billion.
$34 billion.
Owed to Exxon and its partners to cover those accumulated costs.
That is nearly 4 times Guyana's current annual non-oil GDP. It's an enormous sum, and it speaks directly to the imbalance of the cost recovery mechanism.
They haven't seen the majority of the profits yet, but they've already incurred this enormous debt liability.
That's right. So if the oil market crashes, or if the operations are curtailed by law, exactly what Janki is trying to achieve, Guyana would be on the hook for reimbursing Exxon for those sunk costs.
Wow. Janki herself warns that far from ushering in vast wealth, this contract is more likely to saddle the Guyanese people with an enormous, inescapable bill.
And despite this financial reality, the political argument pushed by the government remains. This oil is the only way to lift the nation out of poverty.
But the data shows this myth of prosperity is already failing.
It's a classic example of flawed metrics. The World Bank heralded extraordinary economic growth that saw GDP per capita rise significantly between 2019 and 2021.
But that calculation is deeply misleading.
Because GDP is an average, it ignores unequal distribution of the gains, meaning a few wealthy elites might be seeing all the benefit, while the majority remain poor.
And crucially, it completely ignores the environmental costs, the very factor Janki tried to make quantifiable with a natural capital framework.
The real revenue figures underscore the imbalance. By the end of 2021, Exxon and its partners had pocketed $3.6 billion in revenue. The Guyanese government, just $607 million.
6 times less.
Exxon took in 6 times the government's revenue. That gap is the practical result of that cost recovery structure.
And this feeds directly into the well-known concept of the oil curse.
Right. And this is a critical piece of context for you, the learner. We have decades of evidence globally showing that countries that become heavily dependent on oil exports often fail to become prosperous democracies.
Instead, they suffer from increased economic volatility, corruption, political instability.
Authoritarianism. Janki and her collaborator, Troy Thomas, have raised concerns that this sudden influx of unequal oil money could threaten the country's fragile political gains and exacerbate its violent political history.
A history which includes high-profile assassinations.
Right. The fear is that the fight over resources will be internalized, leading to violence, not development.
But the government is insistent on rapid development. Vice President Bharat Jagdeo is championing this.
Their core defense against Janki's legal claims is that preventing oil development would cause unwarranted economic and social costs that the country simply cannot afford.
But the plaintiffs are saying the ultimate cost is the failure to guarantee the right to life itself. Let's turn to their stories, which provide the crucial human face to this abstract legal battle.
Troy Thomas is one of the lead plaintiffs. He's a professor of natural sciences and an anti-corruption advocate. He lives on Wakenham Island,
Which relies on a 4-foot seawall built by the Dutch centuries ago that is now crumbling.
His story brings the climate threat home. Worsening storms and increasingly high tides mean the sea regularly inundates homes and rice fields.
He noted that the sea just needs to decide one day, I'm going to be disruptive, and that will be the end of Wakenham. The emotional weight of that is just palpable.
He finds it incomprehensible that the government would actively approve a project whose emissions contribute massively to the very sea level rise threatening his family's survival. His famous quote frames the absurdity perfectly.
What was it?
He said, "I don't see how we can agree to kill ourselves."
Powerful. And the second plaintiff, Quadad de Freitas, is a 23-year-old Wapishana conservation worker from the Rupununi region in the interior.
And his experience confirms that the climate harm is not just a coastal issue.
The Rupununi region is experiencing accelerating and unpredictable climate impacts. The traditional seasons are being erased.
The dry seasons are now hotter, leading to intense drought where wells and traditional fishing ponds dry up. Families lose their drinking water, their source of protein.
And conversely, the rainy seasons are generating floods that are outside the normal cycle, destroying crops, corn, cassava, yams.
The things that are essential for subsistence farming. De Freitas' perspective is so powerful because he connects the dots between Exxon's operation and his daily reality. His community uses solar power, minimal fossil fuels.
And they live a low-impact existence.
Right. And seeing the government greenlight a massive fossil fuel project that directly jeopardizes his community's ability to grow food and access clean water feels not just unjust, but, well, insane. He simply states, "I just don't see the point."
These are the immediate, personal, existential threats that underwrite Janki's entire legal strategy.
They're the foundation of the case.
With that context, we move into the courtroom. Part 4 outlines the direct conflict between the visionary constitutional rights Janki drafted and Exxon's operations.
Janki had two important early victories that set the stage. After an unsuccessful 2018 filing, her 2020 lawsuit successfully argued that Exxon's initial 23-year permits violated the EPA's 5-year limit.
That sounds technical, but it was massive in effect, wasn't it?
A huge procedural win. It forced the Environmental Protection Agency to agree to reduce the terms.
Meaning Exxon would have to reapply.
Exactly. Requiring Exxon to reapply for permits and giving the government a chance to impose stricter environmental conditions or reject them entirely in the future.
It showed the EPA was legally enforceable against the oil major.
But the landmark case, filed in May 2021, with Thomas and de Freitas as plaintiffs, goes for the jugular. It argues that the operations violate the constitutional right to a healthy environment.
The very first time this specific provision from the 1998 Constitution is being litigated.
Yes. And this case is centered on the concept of foreseeable harm, which connects the act of extraction today to the climate disaster tomorrow.
The lawsuit argues that government approval violates the constitutional right because the massive intentional release of greenhouse gases from the combustion of this oil causes an existential threat to the health and well-being of every Guyanese citizen.
So the argument is that you can't separate the act of producing 11 billion barrels of oil from the fact that it will eventually be burned.
And that burning is what violates the right.
Exactly. Troy Thomas's affidavit hammers this point home, emphasizing that the combustion is the intended and foreseeable consequence of producing that oil and gas. It's an integrated claim. The harm isn't accidental pollution, it's the inherent purpose of the product.
And to solidify the foreseeability argument, Thomas introduced a devastating piece of evidence. He quoted Exxon's own 1982 research.
This is the legal equivalent of a smoking gun. The research, done internally by Exxon decades ago, concluded that mitigation of the greenhouse effect would require major reductions in fossil fuel combustion.
So this evidence proves two things. First, that the harm was foreseeable.
And second, that Exxon knew this harm was serious enough to require massive changes in their core business model 4 decades ago.
And what was Exxon's legal strategy in response to that?
Purely procedural, highly technical.
Yeah.
They tried to throw out Thomas's entire affidavit on the grounds that he, a professor of natural sciences, is not a certified climate scientist.
A tactic to block the admission of facts that are devastating to their defense.
As Bert Schmidt noted, that type of legal maneuver is telling. Exxon is not going to concede anything about climate change unless they have a gun to their head, metaphorically.
They want to prevent their own historical knowledge from entering the legal record.
Meanwhile, the defensive alignment is robust. Exxon joined the government as a co-defendant in September 2021.
Which shows they are not willing to stand by and let the government take the fall.
It signals they recognize the severity of the constitutional challenge and intend to deploy their full legal might.
And the core counter-argument from the defense is built into the Constitution itself, right?
Yeah.
They're using the clause that immediately follows the environmental rights provision.
That's the crux of the legal debate. While the state must secure sustainable development, the Constitution says it must do so while promoting justifiable economic and social development. That clause is the government's entire defense.
So the government is essentially arguing that the massive promised oil revenue, the path to GDP growth, is the justifiable economic development that must be balanced against any abstract future environmental concern.
Yes. They're claiming that to stop oil production now would lead to unwarranted economic and social costs, lost jobs, lost revenue. That would be worse than the future climate risks.
The court must now define whether economic gain can legally justify the effective violation of a citizen's right to life and health.
And this is where it gets really interesting for legal scholars. Joanna Setzer from the London School of Economics analyzed this case.
And she noted that it advances human rights-based climate litigation because it uniquely challenges the permitting of new oil reserves.
This is a major legal frontier. Most climate lawsuits focus on historical pollution holding companies accountable for what they did years ago.
Janki's case demands responsibility for what they will do years from now.
Effectively using constitutional law to manage a nation's climate budget. If the courts accept that the production of oil constitutes a present violation of a future right, that is a legal revolution.
The ramifications of this case extend far beyond Georgetown's Supreme Court. This is fundamentally about global accountability for future fossil fuel extraction.
If Janki succeeds, it sets a monumental global precedent. It validates the use of strong domestic constitutional rights, often found in Global South nations that are highly vulnerable, as the primary legal tool to challenge new fossil fuel projects.
Any climate activist in a similar nation could use this as a template.
Absolutely. And for Exxon, the implications for their investors are staggering. We established earlier that Guyana is slated to become Exxon's single largest site of daily oil production within 8 years.
Losing access to this operation or having it permanently curtailed due to a human rights violation, that would send tremors through the financial market.
Carol Muffett called it an extraordinarily significant finding. It would signal that the company's core business model, expanding extraction in vulnerable nations, is fundamentally incompatible with confronting the climate crisis.
And therefore incompatible with sustainable returns.
Right. Investors would be forced to reassess the viability of all high-risk projects.
Let's discuss the potential outcome for the government, the so-called impossible ruling. If Janki wins, what exactly might the court mandate?
If the court agrees that the oil operation violates the constitutional right to a healthy environment, the government would be placed in an impossible legal position.
To continue permitting, the government would essentially have to prove a negative.
Right. That producing 11 billion barrels of oil would not contribute to a worsening of global warming that threatens their citizens' rights.
And scientifically, that is impossible to prove.
Precisely. The potential outcomes are therefore drastic. The government could be legally obligated to forego all new oil authorizations, revoke existing licenses, or potentially have the court end oil drilling entirely.
And the tide of global opinion is actually moving in Janki's favor.
It is. In July 2022, 23 years after Janki wrote the concept into Guyana's constitution, the UN General Assembly recognized the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a fundamental human right guaranteed to all.
Which strengthens the legal foundation for similar challenges everywhere.
Of course, the fight continues amidst immense pressure. We've seen growing domestic protests, though still rare, outside Exxon's onshore base, with powerful signs demanding, "Stop raping our country."
But the legal road is never smooth.
Never. Exxon's operations have had minor setbacks, like a 42-gallon oil spill in 2021. And more recently, the judicial process has slowed significantly. The judge presiding over the hearing retired and has yet to be replaced.
And we noted the team disparity earlier. Janki's co-counsel, Ronald Birch-Smith, withdrew.
He did, citing differences in certain technical aspects. That leaves Janki to carry the weight of the case alone, though she has since secured a new partner.
Despite these setbacks, her resolve remains absolute.
She continues to argue the case, and she has filed 3 other related cases against the government and Exxon to attack the project from different legal angles. She views this, and I think rightly so, as the biggest climate change case in the world.
Her perspective really reframes the entire narrative, doesn't it? It changes it from one of victimhood to one of agency.
It does. She encapsulates the entire effort when she says, "This isn't a story of powerlessness, it's a story of power." The power is in the law itself, especially the constitutional foundation she built, using her insider knowledge of the industry she now fights.
She knew the threats were coming, and she armed her country against them.
Exactly.
This has been a deeply insightful deep dive. We've covered the visionary legal foundation Janki helped build, a literal constitutional fortress, the catastrophic financial imbalance of the lopsided oil deal, and the profound, immediate climate threat facing the Guyanese people if this carbon bomb is fully detonated.
And the real power here, for you, the learner, to take away, is that this case highlights how constitutional law in global South nations, which is often overlooked by Western legal and financial media, can contain some of the most powerful and effective tools for global climate accountability.
Janki is using the law to ensure that corporations and governments face the intended and foreseeable consequence of their actions.
Right. Not just the technical details of pollution.
It's a powerful movement that forces the acknowledgement that the cost of development cannot legally be the price of survival itself.
And that raises an important question for everyone to consider. If a country is already facing imminent, verifiable threats from sea level rise and extreme weather threats that jeopardize the majority of its population,
Can any level of promised, justifiable economic development, especially one structured so unequally, ever legally outweigh the constitutional right to survival for present and future generations?
something for you to mull or explore on your own.